The sun had barely risen over the vast stretches of desert, but its heat already pressed down on the earth like a heavy blanket. The winds whispered over the dry, cracked land, carrying with them the faint smell of sagebrush and distant smoke from campfires left behind by travelers. Among the endless sand and scattered rocks, a lone figure moved with cautious steps. She was an Apache woman. Her dark hair tangled and her skin sun-kissed from days under the relentless sun. Every step she took was careful, measured, because she knew the desert could be unforgiving for those who faltered. Her name was Aida, though she had said it only to herself in quiet moments, when the emptiness of the land allowed her thoughts to speak aloud. She had been abandoned, left behind by settlers who had feared the wrath of her people. They had spoken of danger, of a land sacred and untouchable, and yet it was they who had fled, leaving her to survive on her own. At first, anger had burned in her chest. She had shouted at the wind, called their names, hoping her voice would carry across the desert and reach them. But the land only returned silence. Slowly, anger gave way to fear. Fear that she might not make it through the day, that the sun and the emptiness would defeat her before she could find safety. Aida carried a small bundle of belongings, wrapped tightly in a cloth, clutched against her chest. Inside were a few dried meats, a canteen with only half a cup of water, and a small knife her grandmother had given her, its handle worn smooth from years of use. Every item was precious, and she guarded them as if her life depended on it, which, in truth, it did. Her feet were blistered from the rocks, her muscles ached from climbing over sharp ridges, and her throat burned from thirst. Yet she forced herself to move forward, driven by instinct, hope, and a stubborn will to survive. The desert was alive in ways that many travelers did not understand. Coyotes howled in the distance, their voices strange and lonely, and lizards darted across the rocks, disappearing into small crevices. Aida knew which plants could provide water if necessary, and which snakes were venomous. She moved with a quiet attentiveness, listening to every sound, watching every shadow. The sacred land of her ancestors had taught her these lessons. She could not afford to forget them now. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher. Sweat ran down Aida's back, and she wiped it away with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of dust on her skin. Her canteen was nearly empty, and each sip felt like a lifeline she could not waste. She crouched behind a large boulder, panting, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining her village, her family, and the stories her grandmother had told her of the land's spirits. The memory gave her strength, a small flicker of warmth in the harsh desert. As she rested, she thought about the settlers who had abandoned her. Fear had driven them away. She knew that. Fear of the Apache. Fear of the sacred land they did not understand. But still, she could not help but feel the sting of betrayal. She had trusted them, at least in part, believing they would travel together, that she would not face the desert alone. The silence of the land around her was a harsh reminder that she was entirely on her own. Aida's journey was not just physical, it was mental and emotional. She had to push back against the panic that threatened to rise in her chest every time the wind kicked up dust or a distant animal cried out. Every sound was a question. Was it a predator? Was it a person? Should she run, hide, or continue forward? Her mind raced as much as her body, and she learned to steady both with deep, controlled breaths. By midday, the sun was a blazing ball overhead, and the heat radiated from the earth like waves of fire. Aida pressed herself to the shade of a jagged rock formation, her muscles trembling from fatigue. She dipped her fingers into the small amount of water left in her canteen, letting it drip slowly into her mouth. Each drop was a gift, and she savored it, knowing she would need all her strength for the journey ahead. She could see mirages on the horizon, the illusion of water shimmering over the sand, and she fought the instinct to rush toward them. She had learned from experience that the desert could trick the mind as cruelly as it could punish the body. Despite her exhaustion, Aita's determination never wavered. She thought of her ancestors, of the Apache people who had survived countless hardships on these lands. Their strength flowed through her veins, giving her courage. She whispered prayers to the spirits of the land, asking for guidance, for protection, for just a little mercy in her struggle. The wind carried her words away. But somehow, the act of speaking them grounded her, reminded her she was not completely alone. As the day wore on, shadows lengthened, and the temperature slowly began to drop. Aita welcomed the cooler air but remained wary. Nights in the desert could be as dangerous as the day, filled with sudden drops in temperature and hidden threats. She searched for a suitable place to rest, a small hollow among rocks where she could hide and conserve her energy. Crawling into the small shelter, she wrapped herself in her cloth bundle, drawing what warmth she could from it. Lying there, she allowed herself to reflect on her life before this journey. She remembered her family, the stories her grandmother told about the sacred land, and the lessons of resilience passed down through generations. She remembered laughter around the fire, the smell of fresh bread, and the rhythm of the seasons marked by planting and harvest. These memories were bittersweet but kept her grounded, reminding her that she had a life worth fighting for. Hours passed in quiet, broken only by the occasional cry of a distant coyote or the whisper of wind through the rocks. Fatigue tugged at her eyelids, and she drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. Dreams mixed with reality, and she imagined herself wandering endlessly, lost in an empty, featureless world. Even in her dreams, she kept moving, driven by the same determination that had carried her through the day. It was then, as the sky began to turn pale orange with the approach of evening, that she heard a faint sound distinct against the quiet of the desert. At first, she thought it was another coyote, but the rhythm was different. Hooves. Someone was riding a horse, moving steadily across the land. Aita's heart leapt. Could it be a settler? A threat? Or could it be help? She pressed herself closer to the rocks, straining to see through the last light of day. Every nerve alert. The sound grew closer, and Aita realized that whoever was approaching was alone. The pace was steady, careful, deliberate. Relief and caution mingled within her. She wanted to call out, to let the rider know she was there, but she hesitated. The desert had taught her that appearances could be deceiving, that danger often arrived when least expected. Still, a small part of her allowed herself a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this stranger could be the answer to her prayers. The horse's hooves crunched over the rocks, and Aita's breath caught in her throat. She clutched her bundle tightly, ready to make a decision in an instant. Should she wait and observe, or risk revealing herself? Every instinct screamed caution. Yet another part of her, tired, worn, and desperate, urged her to hope. She had survived this long, but the desert had already taken so much from her. Could she endure more? Or was this the moment that might finally turn her fortune? As the rider came into view, a figure appeared against the dimming sky. One leg, she noticed immediately, but the cowboy rode with skill, navigating the difficult terrain with ease. There was something in his posture, calm, deliberate, capable, that suggested he was familiar with the land and its challenges. Aita's pulse quickened, a mix of curiosity and cautious optimism. This was no ordinary traveler. Perhaps, she thought, her prayers had been answered in the most unexpected of ways. She stayed still, watching him approach, every sense alert. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time in days, she felt the faint stirrings of hope. Maybe she would not face the desert alone after all. Maybe someone, even a stranger, could help her survive the night, guide her back to safety, and remind her that even in the harshest lands, kindness and courage still existed. And as the cowboy drew nearer, Aita felt something shift inside her. She could not know what lay ahead, But she knew one thing with certainty. She would meet this stranger, and together, their stories bound by the sacred land and the trials of the desert would soon begin. The cowboy guided his horse closer, and Aida's heart raced with a mixture of caution and hope. The man's one-legged stance did not slow him. Instead, he balanced himself with a remarkable skill that made her realize he knew this land as well as she did. He had a calm presence, a quiet strength that seemed to flow from his movements, and it gave her a strange sense of comfort despite the exhaustion she felt. "You all right?" he called out in a steady voice, careful not to startle her. Aida nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak yet. Her throat was dry, and her words felt heavy. The cowboy dismounted gracefully, using a wooden crutch he had fashioned for himself. Each step he took was deliberate, yet his movements were surprisingly swift. He looked at her with eyes that were kind, yet aware of the dangers of the desert. Aida studied him for a moment. There was no hostility in his gaze, only a quiet determination. Slowly, she stepped out from behind the rocks, clutching her bundle tightly. I'm fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She hated how weak she sounded, how fragile she must seem after days alone. The cowboy shook his head gently, as if he understood without needing more words. "Come on," he said simply. "You need water and shade. You can't keep walking like this." He gestured to his horse, and Aida, with a cautious glance, allowed him to help her onto it. The horse shifted slightly under her weight, and she held on tightly, feeling a mix of fear and relief. With the cowboy leading the way, they moved slowly across the desert, every step measured and careful. As they traveled, Aida finally found the courage to speak. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling. I thought I wouldn't make it." The cowboy glanced at her, his expression gentle. "You're tougher than you know," he said. "But even the toughest people need help sometimes. That's what I'm here for." The sun dipped lower, painting the desert in warm hues of orange and gold. Shadows stretched across the rocks, and the temperature began to drop. The cowboy led her to a small oasis he had found years ago, a hidden spring surrounded by palm-like plants and a shallow pool of fresh water. It was a place few travelers knew, protected by rocks and bushes, almost like it was hiding from the world itself. Aida dismounted with trembling legs. The cool water was a blessing. She knelt beside the spring and drank deeply, letting the liquid wash away the dust and dryness from her throat. The cowboy watched her, leaning against his crutch. The sun, highlighting the lines of his face, the strength in his single leg, and the quiet confidence in his posture. "You've been walking for days, haven't you?" he asked. Aida nodded, memories of the long hours under the sun flashing in her mind. She told him about the settlers who had abandoned her, about her struggle to survive on the sacred land, about the fear and loneliness that had pressed down on her like a heavy weight. The cowboy listened quietly, nodding in understanding, never interrupting, letting her words flow like the water she drank from the spring. Once she had regained some strength, he helped her to a shaded area nearby. They shared a simple meal, some dried meat he had carried, and what little she had left in her bundle. As they ate, Aida noticed the way he moved with care, how he adapted to his disability with patience and skill. It made her realize that strength came in many forms, not just in physical ability. This man, with one leg and a calm heart, had the courage to travel alone in a harsh land and the wisdom to help others survive. Night fell over the desert, bringing with it a quiet that was almost sacred. The stars blanketed the sky, twinkling like distant fires in the blackness. Aida wrapped herself in her cloth, feeling a comfort she hadn't known for days. The cowboy built a small fire, careful to keep it contained, and they sat together in silence. For a while, the only sounds were the crackling of the flames and the distant howl of a coyote. "Rest now," the cowboy said. "You've earned it." Aida nodded, closing her eyes, feeling the tension in her body slowly ease. She thought of the day's journey, the fear she had carried, and the unexpected kindness that had arrived just when she needed it most. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of hope that she might survive this ordeal. When she woke, the first light of dawn had begun to touch the desert with soft pinks and golds. The cowboy was already awake, tending to the horse and preparing for the journey ahead. Aita rose slowly, her body stiff from the long night, but her spirit lighter. They would travel together, he explained, at least until she reached safety, or her tribe. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for his company, his skill, and his willingness to help without expecting anything in return. As they moved through the desert, the cowboy shared stories of his life, of the challenges he had faced with one leg, of the lessons the land had taught him. He spoke of storms survived, rivers crossed, and the people he had met who had shown kindness in unexpected ways. Aita listened, fascinated, realizing that the desert had shaped him just as it had shaped her. There was wisdom in his words, patience in his actions, and a gentle strength that made her feel safe. Days passed as they traveled together, stopping only when necessary to rest or gather water. Aita regained her strength, learning from the cowboy's techniques, from his knowledge of the land, and from his quiet confidence. They moved slowly, deliberately, respecting the desert and its challenges. In those days, Aita learned not just to survive, but to trust again. The fear that had gripped her since being abandoned began to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism. Finally, they reached the edge of her tribe's lands, where the sacred land gave way to familiar hills and rivers. Aita's heart swelled with relief and joy. She had made it, not just because of her own strength, but because someone had extended a hand when she needed it most. The cowboy stopped at a safe distance, allowing her to reunite with her people. Her family and tribe members emerged, eyes wide with concern and relief. Aita turned to the cowboy, wanting to express her gratitude. I cannot thank you enough," she said, her voice full of emotion. The cowboy smiled gently. "No need," he said simply. "You survived. That's enough. Thanks for me." He mounted his horse, adjusted his crutch, and prepared to leave. Aita watched him go, feeling a deep respect and admiration for the man who had saved her life. Even after he disappeared into the horizon, Aita felt his presence linger. She thought of his bravery, his skill, and the quiet kindness that had carried her through the desert. She knew she would never forget the one-legged cowboy who had appeared when all seemed lost, a reminder that courage and compassion often come in unexpected forms. The tribe welcomed her back, offering food, water, and care. Aita shared her story, of the desert, of survival, and of the man who had helped her. They listened, amazed by the resilience she had shown and grateful for the stranger who had returned her safely. Aita felt a renewed connection to her people, to her land, and to the lessons of the desert. In the days that followed, she often thought of the cowboy. She wondered where he had come from, how he had learned to survive so well, and what other journeys awaited him. She knew one thing for certain. The desert was harsh. The world could be cruel. But the kindness of one person could make all the difference. His courage had given her life, and that life was a gift she would never take for granted. Aita returned to her routines, to the sacred land and the teachings of her ancestors. But she carried with her the memory of the cowboy. His story became a part of hers, a testament to the unexpected bonds formed in moments of need, and to the strength that can be found when someone reaches out to help. She understood now that survival was not just about enduring the desert, but about recognizing the humanity in others, about trusting again, and about moving forward with hope. And so, the Apache woman walked among her people once more, stronger, wiser, and forever changed by the journey. She had faced the desert, endured its trials, and found a friend in the most unlikely of companions. The memory of the one-legged cowboy stayed with her, a quiet reminder of courage, compassion, and the power of human kindness.